"Tomorrow," he said, as though it were the most casual thing in the world. "Tomorrow, I'll take you back." And just like that, the warmth I had felt just a few hours ago, the kind that comes from family, slipped away, replaced by the cold reality of my place in their world. I used to think Thanksgiving meant going home, even if that home hadn't truly been mine for a long time. But what is home when you're not welcome there? Not really this year. Things were different. David, my son, insisted on picking me up from the assisted living facility himself. He said his son, Ben, missed me terribly, and that it would be nice to have me early for the holiday. I packed my things, 2 jars of homemade peach jam, a turkey ornament I had sewn from fabric scraps, and a cardigan, little mementos of a life I once had. When I arrived, Jenna greeted me with that smile of hers, polite, but distant, like she'd done 100 times before. "The guest room's ready," she said. "You'll just be here for a couple of nights." The house smelled of cinnamon candles and freshly cleaned floors, but beneath that, I could already sense something, the familiar tension, a reminder that I was a guest, never really family anymore. Ben ran up to me, and for a brief moment, his hug felt warm. It was the closest I'd felt to being home in years. But when we sat down for dinner, everything seemed perfectly arranged, too perfect. 3 kinds of pie, a steaming turkey like something out of a magazine. The conversation was light. David talking about infrastructure plans for the city, Jenna correcting his word choices. But when Ben asked me, almost casually, "Grandma, when are you leaving?" my stomach dropped. The question hung in the air, and I realized then that I was never really here to stay. The night stretched on, but by the time I cleared the dishes, it was clear I didn't belong here. I was a placeholder in their lives, a check on their to-do list. The kitchen smelled of dish soap and roasted squash, like leftovers from a life I used to live. It was a familiar ache, but one I couldn't quite place. As the night wore on, I found myself lost in my thoughts. I thought back to David's first night away from home, how I'd sat by the window waiting for him. I remembered his college graduation when he promised he'd move me out of that tiny town. But what he moved me into wasn't a home. It was a facility. And suddenly, the question I had been asking myself for days, weeks, months, became clear. Why am I even here? The next day, the air in the house felt too still, like a photograph, frozen in time. There was a sense of artificial cheerfulness, a forced normalcy that reminded me I was just a guest, not someone who truly belonged. I had barely unpacked my bags when David, holding a cup of coffee, called out that he would be taking me back after lunch. The words stung, but I kept my emotions to myself. I had long since learned not to show how hurt I was when the world around me moved on without truly noticing. The house was quiet, except for the occasional clink of silverware against plates as we sat down for Thanksgiving dinner. Ben was bustling about, trying to impress everyone with his jokes. They were silly, the kind of jokes only a child could get away with. But I laughed. His innocence was a brief reprieve from the underlying tension I could feel. I helped him cut his meat, trying to ignore the discomfort that had been settling in my chest. David was talking about the city's new infrastructure plans, his voice light, almost too casual. And then Jenna corrected his choice of words, as she often did. It was a ritual I had come to expect, but this time it felt louder, sharper, more telling. No one was asking me how I was doing or if I was comfortable. Instead, they were moving along with their lives, making small talk as if I wasn't really there at all. Dinner continued, the turkey perfectly roasted, the pies arranged like they belonged in a magazine spread. But Ben's innocent question, "Grandma, when are you leaving?" cut through the room like a knife. My fork paused midair. David, looking at me with a forced smile, said, "Tomorrow," as though it were a simple matter of checking something off a list. No emotional weight, no hint of hesitation. It was just another part of the plan, another task to complete before the next thing in their busy lives. I tried to mask the hurt. "Tomorrow," I repeated, forcing a smile, my voice betraying nothing. But in that moment, I realized how little I meant to them. I wasn't there because they wanted me to stay, because they missed me, or even because they loved me. I was there because they needed me to be. They needed me for the picture, to keep up appearances, to fill the space for a brief moment. I wasn't family. I was a guest, a placeholder for a few days. A few days to make the house look complete, to make the holiday look like it was meant to be. As the meal continued, I could feel the heaviness growing inside me. The realization hit hard. The conversation was only about them, not about me. I looked around, but there was nothing that felt like home. The way they spoke to each other, the way Jenna sliced potatoes, the way David nodded and kept glancing at his phone. All of it felt like it belonged to a different world. The house might have smelled like cinnamon and floor cleaner, but all I could smell was the sterile scent of a life I was no longer a part of. After dinner, I stood up automatically to clear the dishes. No one stopped me. No one offered to help. No one seemed to care. As I placed the dishes away, I realized the cabinets were higher than I remembered. The dishes felt heavier in my hands, and I had to stretch on my toes to put them back in their places. The simple, everyday tasks that once felt comforting now seemed like chores. The kitchen, once a place of laughter and warmth, now felt cold and indifferent. The moonlight filtering in through the window only made everything feel lonelier, colder. In the background, I could hear Jenna and David's voices. They weren't speaking to me but about me, as though I wasn't even there. I reorganized the kitchen storage again while she was here, Jenna said, her tone clinical and detached. David just grunted in response, not even bothering to pretend to care. I stood there, hands trembling slightly as I wiped down the countertops, my mind racing. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I wasn't family. I wasn't even a guest. I was a task to be managed, an object to be moved from one place to another. They talked about me as if I were an object they had to store, something that didn't matter beyond the duty of fulfilling a role. Then, Jenna walked in and placed a sealed container by the sink. "Take this with you," she said. "It's low sodium, safe to have around." She handed it to me as though she were offering me a parting gift. The container, neatly wrapped, held the essence of what I had become in their eyes, a safe, controlled, manageable part of their life. I didn't say a word. I simply took it, a symbol of how little they saw me now. No warmth, no love, just practicality, just convenience. That night, as I sat on the edge of the bed, I felt the overwhelming weight of it all. I looked at my hands, my dry, aging hands that had once held children, comforted loved ones, cooked meals, and mended wounds. Now, they held a bag that would soon be packed with things I no longer needed. The life I had once lived seemed so distant now, like a dream I couldn't quite remember. I rubbed my hands together, catching the faint trace of hand cream from that morning. It was the only scent I had left from a time when I was needed, when I was truly part of something. Later, I couldn't sleep. I got up in the middle of the night and went downstairs for a glass of water. As I stood there, the cold water running through my hands. I overheard David and Jenna talking. "Are you really taking her back tomorrow?" Jenna asked, her voice sharp, like she was planning an itinerary for a conference. "Yeah." David's response was flat. "She doesn't want to stay long anyway." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a thought. It was just a statement, like moving me around was as normal as breathing. I leaned against the counter, trying to hold myself together. The tap dripped, its sound the only thing I could hear in the silence. I felt so small, so invisible, like a stranger in my own life. The realization crashed down on me in waves. I wasn't here because they wanted me to be. I was here because they had to fulfill a duty, to keep up appearances. And when it was over, I would be sent back, just as easily as I had come. The next morning, when David came downstairs with his car keys in hand, I was already sitting by the front door, waiting. He blinked in surprise, but I didn't wait for him to say anything. I was done waiting. "I'll take you back after lunch tomorrow," he said, like it was just another thing on his to-do list. "Traffic should be light." I didn't respond. I simply nodded and let the silence fill the space between us. As we drove back to the assisted living facility, I felt a strange calm come over me. The car moved slowly through the streets, and the gray sky outside looked like frost on a window, cold and distant. I knew where I was headed. The familiar yellow hallway and the smell of disinfectant awaited me. Maple Creek Assisted Living wasn't a terrible place. It was safe, sterile, predictable, but it wasn't a home. I forced a smile as I entered the facility. Doris, the receptionist, greeted me with her usual soft, empty voice. "Hi, Mrs. Hall." Back so soon, she didn't ask how I was or if I needed anything. She simply acknowledged my return as though I had never really left. David muttered something about calling later, and just like that, he was gone. I walked back to my room, the room with the Halloween sticker Ben had placed on the door. It was a room for storing people, not for living. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I realized something profound. This was my life now, not because I had chosen it, but because I had been pushed into it. The world outside continued moving forward, while I sat in a corner, forgotten. The weight of it all settled on my chest, and for the first time in years, I wondered how long I could continue living like this, how long until I faded completely into the background, a woman who had been forgotten by her family, lost to a life that wasn't her own. The next few days were a blur of routine, punctuated only by moments that brought the sharp sting of realization. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I was a visitor in my own life. I had arrived at David's home with the hope that maybe this time would be different, that maybe the holidays would bring us closer, but everything felt like a performance, an obligation rather than a reunion. David's house had a perfect appearance, with its festive decorations and the smell of warm turkey wafting through the air. Ben was excited, running around the house, talking nonstop about his friends at school, about his favorite games, and his silly jokes. He was still a child, eager for attention, for affection, and I found solace in his hug when he ran up to me. It was warm. It felt like home for just a fleeting second. But then, as I helped him with his meal, something shifted in the air. The conversation at the table continued as if nothing was out of the ordinary. David chatting about his work, the city's new development plans, and Jenna correcting him on every little thing. I had been a part of these discussions before, many years ago, but now it was different. They were all so caught up in their own worlds, in their busy lives, and I was just there watching from the sidelines. I was no longer a participant in their lives, only an accessory to the holiday. I could feel it in every word that wasn't directed at me, in every glance that didn't come my way. They weren't interested in what I thought or how I felt. Then, Ben's innocent question cut through the air like a knife. "Grandma, when are you leaving?" His words were simple, but they hung in the air like a heavy fog, choking me. It wasn't just a question, it was a reminder of my place in this house. It was as if he was reminding me that my time here was limited, a brief interlude before I was sent back to my reality. "Tomorrow," David said with a shrug, as if it were nothing more than a casual plan, not a part of a much bigger truth. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Tomorrow. It was all planned out, all neatly arranged in their schedule. My presence was just a blip on their radar, a necessary detail they had to take care of before life moved on. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, my appetite gone, my heart heavy. The meal continued, but the joy had drained out of it. David and Jenna continued their conversation, occasionally throwing in polite comments for me, but I could feel the distance between us growing wider with every passing moment. I wasn't really here because they missed me. I wasn't here because they cared. I was here because it was expected. I was here to fill a role, to check a box off their list. After dinner, I excused myself to clear the table, but no one stopped me. No one offered to help. No one seemed to care. The task, like everything else, fell on my shoulders. As I washed the dishes, I realized how much I had changed. The cabinets felt higher than I remembered, the plates heavier. Everything seemed out of reach, like I didn't belong. I had to stand on my toes just to put the dishes away. And the simple act of cleaning, of caring for the house, seemed like an alien thing. This wasn't my home anymore. This wasn't my family. They were a part of a life I used to live, but I had outgrown it. I didn't belong here anymore. I could hear David and Jenna's voices from the other room. Jenna was speaking to him in a tone that reminded me of a business transaction, clinical, impersonal. I reorganized the kitchen storage again while she was here this time, she said, her words cold and efficient. David didn't respond, just grunted, lost in his thoughts. I stood there, my hands still in the soapy water, feeling like a stranger in my own life. They weren't talking about me. They were talking about me. I wasn't a person anymore. I wasn't even a guest. I was a task to be managed, a responsibility to be handled. And then Jenna walked in, carrying a container and handing it to me. "Take this with you," she said in the same detached voice. "It's low sodium, safe to have around." The low sodium comment hit me like a slap in the face. I was being treated like a problem to be managed, like a health risk to be controlled. She wasn't offering me food. She wasn't offering me care. She was offering me a container of something safe, something neutral, something that could be safely packed away with the rest of their lives. I didn't say anything. I took the container from her, my fingers trembling slightly as I wrapped my hand around it. It was just another reminder of how little I mattered. I wasn't here to be loved. I wasn't here to be cared for. I was here to fill a space, to be moved in and out of their lives like a piece of furniture. And for the first time, I wondered if this was it, if this was how it was going to be for the rest of my life. The evening passed in silence, the house growing colder with every passing hour. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, my mind racing with the thoughts I had been trying to ignore. This wasn't a home. This wasn't my family. I wasn't a part of their lives anymore. I was just someone who had been invited to check off a box, to make the holiday look complete, and then sent back to the place where I was just another resident in a facility. I wasn't loved. I wasn't needed. I was a memory that had outstayed its welcome. That night, I didn't sleep well. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying everything over and over. The feeling of being invisible, of being a burden, of being nothing more than an obligation. I thought about David and Jenna and how little they really saw me. I thought about Ben, who had once been the light of my life, and how his affection was now just a fleeting gesture, a momentary hug to make everything seem right. I thought about my life before, about the promises David had made when he was young. I remembered when he said, "Mom, I'm going to move you out of that tiny town one day." But that day never came. Instead, he moved me into a facility, a place that was safe but hollow, a place where I was not a mother, not a woman, not even a person. I was just a resident, just a body waiting to be forgotten. The next morning, when David came down the stairs with his car keys in hand, I was already dressed and sitting by the front door. I wasn't waiting for him to pick me up. I was waiting for the inevitable. I had already accepted my place in this world, in their world. "I'll take you back after lunch tomorrow," David said, his voice still warm but distant. "Traffic should be light." I nodded, said nothing, and stood up to gather my things. I had nothing left to say. When the car pulled into the driveway of the assisted living facility, I felt a wave of familiarity wash over me. This was where I was meant to be. This was where they had put me. The front door slid open, and Doris, the receptionist, looked up at me and smiled. "Hi, Mrs. Hall. Back so soon," she said, her voice soft but empty. David didn't linger. He just muttered something about calling later and left. I walked back to my room, the room with the Halloween sticker Ben had put on the door. It was a room meant for placing someone, not for living. I sat down on the bed, my thoughts spiraling. The room hadn't changed since I first moved in. Beige curtains, an alarm clock on the nightstand that had stopped ticking weeks ago. Everything about it screamed temporary, as though I was never meant to settle here. And yet, I had settled into this life, into this waiting room of existence. And as I looked around, I realized that this was my life now, a life of being forgotten, a life of being put away. I had spent so many years giving everything to everyone else that I had forgotten to live for myself. And now, I was just waiting for the end, waiting for something to change. But in the silence of that room, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The next few days passed in a blur as I found myself lost in the routine of life at the assisted living facility. It was as if I had become part of the furniture, a fixture in the building that people barely noticed unless they needed something. I moved through each day like a shadow, doing what I was supposed to do, but never really living. The activities scheduled each day seemed pointless, more like distractions to fill the hours until the next meal or the next scheduled event. I had tried to engage with the other residents. I attended the book club, though no one really discussed the book. We simply took turns reading passages aloud. The group would hum along with a polite here and there, but no one seemed interested in the story. The truth was, none of us really had any interest in reading at all anymore. We were just marking time, ticking off the hours until the day ended, and the night stretched out into silence once again. The knitting group was the same. We sat there, working on our projects in silence. And occasionally someone would look over and nod, acknowledging the work being done, but not really seeing the person behind it. I started a scarf, not because I wanted to, but because the motion of knitting was soothing, almost like counting time itself, loop after loop, knot after knot. I created something with my hands, but the scarf never really seemed to get any longer. Time seemed to slow down in the facility, stretching the days into a quiet, endless loop. The food was always the same: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Every meal felt like a repeat of the last. The placards on the tables read low-sodium meal seemed like labels, not just on the food, but on me. Low sodium, mild, bland, easy to manage. I couldn't help but think that it was more than just the food they were labeling. It was my life now, mild, bland, and easy to manage. But that wasn't living. That was just surviving. I found myself staring at the placard on my table, my fork suspended in midair, as the reality of it all settled over me like a weight I could no longer ignore. This wasn't a life. This wasn't even existing. It was just passing through time. Every day was a repeat of the one before. Every meal a carbon copy of the last. And I couldn't help but wonder if I was being slowly erased from the world, fading into the background like the faded curtains in my room, the dusty furniture that no one bothered to move. At 3:30 every afternoon, they would show an old movie in the activity room. That day it was The Wizard of Oz, and I found myself sitting in the back row, watching Dorothy cry. There's no place like home. The line struck me deeply. This place, this facility, wasn't a home. It wasn't even close. It was just a place where I waited for time to pass, waited for the inevitable, waited for the day when I would disappear quietly, unnoticed. The silence in the room felt deafening as I stared at the screen, but inside, there was a storm brewing. I wasn't ready to just sit here and wait to fade away. I couldn't live this way, stuck in a loop of routine, day after day. I wanted to break free, to find something that made me feel alive again, something that wasn't controlled by the schedules and the regulations of the facility. But I didn't know where to start. Every thought seemed to get lost in the haze of routine, the low hum of the world moving on without me. That evening, I sat by the window, staring into the dark sky, the cold air pressing against the glass. I had lived a lifetime of sacrifice, raising children, caring for a family, putting everyone else's needs above my own. I had done everything for them, and yet, in the end, I was here, in a facility, alone, forgotten. I thought of David, of his wife, Jenna, and of Ben. I thought about how they had all moved on with their lives, and how I had been left behind. And then it hit me. I wasn't just forgotten by them, I had forgotten myself. In the years I had spent taking care of everyone else, I had stopped taking care of me. I had stopped thinking about what I wanted, what I needed. I had become so caught up in their lives that I had forgotten my own. And now, here I was, waiting for them to notice me, waiting for them to see me as more than just a caretaker, more than just a mother, a grandmother, a role to be filled. But I couldn't keep waiting. I couldn't keep sitting here, lost in the memories of a life I used to live. I had to make a change. I had to find something to hold on to, something that was mine, something that would remind me I was still alive. I wasn't ready to fade away into the background. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew that I couldn't just leave and start over, but I had to try. For the first time in a long time, I wanted something more than this. I wanted to feel like I mattered again. I didn't know where I would go or what I would do, but I knew I had to take a step forward, even if it was a small one. I had spent too many years living for everyone else, doing what was expected of me, and now it was time to live for me. It was time to break free from the confines of this place, to stop being a part of the routine and start living again. That day, I decided to go to the activity room for the first time in weeks. The knitting group was meeting, and I sat down with them, picking up my needles and letting the familiar motion of knitting soothe my hands. But this time, it wasn't just about the motion. It was about reclaiming something for myself. Every stitch was a declaration. Every loop, every knot was a reminder that I still had control over something, that I still had the power to create, to build. As I worked, I felt something stir inside me, a spark of life, of energy, something I hadn't felt in years. And in that moment, I knew that I wasn't done yet. I wasn't finished. I was still here, still capable of creating, still capable of living. I wasn't just a body waiting to be forgotten. I was a person with a story, with something to offer, and I would find a way to make the world see that. I never imagined that the holidays would be anything less than perfect. After all, Thanksgiving was supposed to be about family coming together, sharing warmth, and celebrating all that we had. But this year, that picture-perfect scene crumbled before my eyes. I had left my life behind to make this visit to David's house, hopeful that maybe, just maybe, things had changed, that maybe my son and his family would see me for who I was again, not just a memory or a fixture in their past, but someone who still mattered. But I quickly learned that this was all a carefully arranged performance, designed to check off a box rather than a genuine reunion. The house was filled with warmth, yet I felt chilled to the bone. As I entered, I was greeted with smiles that were just enough to make it seem like they cared, just enough to make me feel like I belonged, if only for a few days. David had been kind enough to pick me up from the assisted living center himself, saying that Ben missed me terribly. I had packed my things carefully, a few jars of homemade peach jam, a little turkey ornament I had sewn from fabric scraps, and a cardigan I loved. It was nothing grand, just small tokens of the woman I used to be. I wanted to believe that I still mattered, that my presence could somehow bring back the warmth that I had once given to this home. Jenna greeted me with her usual smile, polite but distant. "The guest room's ready. You'll just be here for a couple of nights," she said, as though it were no big deal. And yet, I could sense the underlying tension in her words, the subtle implication that I wasn't truly wanted, just tolerated. The house smelled of cinnamon candles and freshly cleaned floors, but everything felt manufactured, like an attempt to create a home rather than a place where memories were being made. Ben ran up to me, his face lighting up with excitement. His hug felt warm, and for a fleeting moment, I felt something stir within me, a connection, a spark of the love I had once given him. But it quickly passed, replaced by the cold reality of the situation. The meal was prepared with care, 3 kinds of pie, a perfectly roasted turkey, but nothing could mask the underlying tension. David and Jenna spoke of city plans, of upcoming projects, and Ben told his jokes, all while I sat there, trying to pretend that everything was fine. They were going through the motions, but there was nothing real about it. I could feel the distance between us, growing wider with every passing second. I helped Ben cut his meat, laughing at his silly jokes. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the growing sense of alienation. The dinner was too perfect, the conversation too polished. It felt like a performance, a script everyone was following, except for me. No one asked how I was doing. No one asked about me. They didn't need to. I wasn't really there. I was just a guest in their home, a placeholder for the holidays, a part of their perfect picture that they had to set up. And then, in the midst of the meal, came the question that pierced me through Grandma. When are you leaving? Ben's voice was so innocent, so casual, but his words cut through me like a knife. I had hoped for more. I had wanted to believe that this visit would be different, that I would be welcomed back into their lives. But instead, I was reminded that I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Tomorrow, David replied, as if it were nothing. Tomorrow, he said, like it was part of a routine, part of the plan. I stared at my plate, my appetite vanishing in an instant. Tomorrow. That was all I was to them. A short visit, an obligation that needed to be fulfilled before they went back to their normal lives. It was a casual statement, so casual it almost hurt, more than if they had been more direct. I wasn't needed. I wasn't wanted. I was just someone who filled a gap for a few days. The evening continued, the conversation ebbing and flowing, but I couldn't join in anymore. The weight of what had just happened, of Ben's question, pressed down on me, and I felt the tears welling up, though I tried to hold them back. I stood up, excusing myself to clear the table, the action automatic. But as I washed the dishes, the reality of my place in this family settled in. No one stopped me. No one offered to help. It was as though I wasn't even there. They went about their business, oblivious to the fact that I was disappearing from their lives, piece by piece. I could hear Jenna's voice from the other room, speaking to David as though I wasn't there. I reorganized the kitchen storage again while she was here, she said, her tone flat, emotionless. David didn't even respond, just grunted in acknowledgement. And that was it. I was a part of their lives only when it was convenient, only when they needed me to be. I wasn't a mother, a grandmother. I was just something to be managed, something to be handled. Jenna came into the kitchen, holding a container. "Take this with you," she said, handing it to me with a casualness that stung. "It's low sodium, safe to have around." Low sodium. That's all I was to them now. Something safe, something controlled, not a person to be cared for, but something to be tolerated, something to be maintained. It was the final insult. The realization that I wasn't a part of their lives anymore hit me hard, but I didn't let it show. I just took the container, my fingers trembling slightly as I wrapped my hand around it. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been forgotten, that I had outlived my usefulness to them. I wasn't a mother or grandmother anymore. I was a guest, a piece of the past they were trying to keep out of sight. Tomorrow, I would be sent back to the place I had come from, to the facility where I had been waiting for years, where I would remain waiting for the rest of my life to unfold, unnoticed. The next morning, David came downstairs with his keys in hand, ready to take me back. I was already dressed, sitting by the front door. I had known this day would come, but I had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. He looked at me, surprised, and then simply said, "I'll take you back after lunch tomorrow. Traffic should be light." I nodded, said nothing, and stood up to gather my things. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just tired of being treated like a part of their past, a relic of a life they had moved on from. I was done being invisible. David drove me back to the assisted living facility, and as we pulled up to the entrance, I knew this was my life now. I had outlived my usefulness to them. I was a memory, a shadow, and nothing more. And yet, as I walked back to my room, I realized something else, something that gave me the strength to keep going. I wasn't done yet. I still had time, and this time I would live for myself. The days blurred together at the facility, each one exactly like the last. The constant hum of routine, the same faces, the same conversations, the same meals, everything had become a pattern, a monotonous loop of time that never seemed to end. I had hoped that my visit to David's home would shake me out of this routine, that it would bring back a sense of meaning, a feeling that I was still part of something, still needed. But the reality hit me hard. I wasn't needed. Not really. I was simply a guest, a box to check on their holiday to-do list. It was like I was invisible to them. They didn't need me to stay, and they certainly didn't want me to. I wasn't family anymore. I was just a guest, the kind of guest who is expected to leave when the visit is over, when the obligations are fulfilled. It had been a long time since I had felt truly needed by anyone, and as I sat in my room that night, I realized that my presence in their lives was no longer significant. I had spent so many years taking care of everyone else, David, Ben, and even Jenna, that I had lost sight of who I was, of what I wanted. I had been so focused on being everything to everyone that I had forgotten to be something to myself. The next day, after David had dropped me off at the facility, I didn't go back to my usual routine. I didn't attend the knitting group or sit through the endless activity sessions. I needed space. I needed to think. The harsh truth was that I had been living for others for far too long. I had poured my life into their needs, their wants, and their schedules, and in the process, I had forgotten what it was like to live for myself. I had become so lost in the roles I had played that I had no idea who I was anymore. I spent the next few hours walking around the facility, taking in the familiar sights, the familiar smells, but none of it felt like home. It never had. I had moved into this place out of necessity, not because I wanted to be here. It wasn't my home. It was a place to stay until the end of my life. And that's what scared me. This facility, with its sterile walls and empty corridors, was where I would spend the rest of my days unless I did something about it. As I walked down the hall, I passed by the activity room where a group of residents were gathered, but none of them noticed me. I was invisible. I wasn't part of their conversations or their lives. I was just another body, another person, waiting for time to pass. And the thought hit me like a wave: if I didn't take control now, I would just fade into the background. I would become nothing more than a memory, someone who once mattered, but who no one cared about anymore. That afternoon, I sat down in my room, staring out the window. The sky was gray, the trees outside swaying gently in the wind. It was a calm, peaceful scene, but to me, it felt suffocating. I couldn't stay here any longer. I couldn't keep living this way. I had spent years trying to be everything to everyone, and it hadn't gotten me anywhere. It was time for me to take a step back and figure out who I was outside of the roles I had played for so long. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going to sit around and wait for the end. I was going to find something that made me feel alive again, something that reminded me that I was still capable of living, still capable of feeling. I couldn't live in this shell of a life, trapped in the routine of a place that wasn't mine. I thought back to the days when I had cared for David and Ben, when I had been there for every milestone, every celebration, every heartbreak. I thought about the moments when I had been needed, when I had been the one they turned to for support, for love, for guidance. Those moments seem so distant now, like they belonged to someone else. But in that moment, I realized that I could still make those moments happen again. It wasn't too late. I had spent so much time waiting for someone to see me, to acknowledge me, but I had forgotten that I could also see myself. I could acknowledge myself. I could live for myself. The next day, I signed up for the knitting group. I hadn't been to one of their sessions in weeks, but today felt different. I picked up my needles and started stitching, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. As my hands worked, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for myself. I wasn't just going through the motions. I was creating something. I was alive again. The motion of knitting was soothing, and as the fabric took shape under my fingers, I felt something shift inside me. It was as though I had been waiting for something to spark, and now, finally, it had. The simple act of making something with my hands reminded me that I still had control over my life, that I could still make something beautiful, something that mattered. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the future. I thought about what I wanted from life now that I wasn't tied to the expectations of others. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew that I wasn't done yet. I wasn't ready to fade away. I had spent too many years living for others, but now it was time to live for me. The next day, I would start taking the steps to reclaim my life, to find a new purpose outside of this facility, outside of the shadows of my past. It was a strange feeling, sitting in the quiet of the assisted living facility, surrounded by people I didn't know, but feeling completely alone. The noise of my family, the busy chatter of David and Jenna, the sound of Ben's laughter, all of it seemed so far away now. I could still hear the echo of their voices in my head, but it wasn't the same as being there. They had moved on without me, and I was left to navigate this place that wasn't home, not by a long shot. I had tried to make the best of it. I really had. I had tried to tell myself that this was a new chapter, that it was okay to be here, that I could find purpose, peace, and perhaps even joy in this new life. But every day felt like I was just waiting for something, anything, to make me feel like I still had a place in this world. And yet, nothing ever came. The days blurred into one another, as I did my best to fill the hours with activities and small conversations. I attended the knitting group, the book club, and even the movie nights, but each time I found myself staring at my hands or the pages of the books, feeling more disconnected from everything around me. I was invisible, a shadow of my former self, fading away with each passing day. Then, one afternoon, something shifted. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it hit me hard. I was sitting in the lounge area, watching a group of residents play bingo, the same faces I saw every day, the same conversations I overheard, the same smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I had been here long enough to realize that this place wasn't about living, it was about waiting for the end. And the realization hit me like a wave. I didn't want to wait anymore. I didn't want to just fade into the background, to become another forgotten face. I didn't want to be here, stuck in a life that wasn't mine, waiting for death to come as the ultimate escape from a life I no longer recognized. I got up, suddenly restless. I needed to do something. I couldn't keep sitting in this chair, waiting for my life to end. I had to make a change. It didn't matter what that change looked like. But I knew that if I didn't start doing something different, I would die here slowly, piece by piece. As I walked down the hall, I thought about everything I had left behind. I thought about my children, David, and how his life had moved on without me, how I had become an afterthought, a person they only reached out to when it was convenient. I had spent so many years giving everything to my family, sacrificing my own dreams and desires, all for them. And now, here I was forgotten. But it wasn't just David and Jenna. I had forgotten myself too. Somewhere along the way, I had lost who I was. The roles I played had become so intertwined with my identity that I didn't know where I ended and they began. I had been a mother, a wife, a grandmother, but I had never been just me. It wasn't too late. I told myself I wasn't done yet. There was more to my life than just being a caretaker, than just being someone who existed in the background of other people's stories. I had my own story, my own life to live. And that was when I decided that I would stop waiting. I would stop being the person who sat in the background, invisible, unnoticed. I would find a way to make a difference in my own life, even if it was in small ways. The next day, I went back to the knitting group, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I picked up my needles and started working. The familiar motion soothed me, but this time it was different. I wasn't just passing time. I wasn't just marking hours on a calendar. I was creating something that belonged to me. With every stitch, I felt a small sense of pride. A small spark of life returned to me. This was mine. This was something I could control. It was a reminder that I could still make something beautiful, that I still had purpose. As the days passed, I started to push myself further. I signed up for more activities. I joined the art class and started drawing again, something I hadn't done in years. I rediscovered the joy of creating something from nothing, of pouring myself into a project and seeing it come to life. It wasn't easy, but it was freeing. Each stroke of the brush, each pencil line, was a step away from the life I had been living, a life of waiting and a step toward living again. But it wasn't just about the activities. It was about the people I met along the way. There was Ethel, a woman in her late 70s, who sat beside me in the art class. She was quiet, but she had a way of looking at the world that made me see things differently. "You've got a nice tension going there," she said one day as I worked on a piece. I nodded, not quite sure what she meant, but there was something comforting about her words. They weren't just about my art, they were about me. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, not as a mother, not as a grandmother, but as just me. By the time I had spent a few weeks back in the routine, I realized that I hadn't just been filling time, I had been rediscovering myself. I had started to carve out a space where I could exist without constantly being needed by others. I was finding my own identity again, independent of the roles I had been playing. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was still a stranger to myself, days when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. But slowly, surely, I began to see the person I used to be reemerge. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible anymore. As I sat in the quiet of the assisted living facility, I couldn't help but reflect on the choices I had made. I had spent so many years giving myself to my family, to my children, to my grandchildren, and yet here I was forgotten, overlooked, and pushed to the margins of their lives. I had become a placeholder, a person they only thought about when it was convenient. The thought hit me hard. How had I let myself become so invisible? But as time passed, I realized that my worth was not determined by how others saw me, but by how I saw myself. I had spent too many years living for others, neglecting my own needs and desires. It was time for me to stop waiting for others to give me validation. I needed to validate myself. I had to take control of my life again, to find the things that brought me joy, the things that made me feel alive. And so, I began. I found new passions, new hobbies, and slowly, I started to rediscover the woman I had once been. The lesson I learned was simple, but profound. We must never lose sight of who we are. No matter how much we give to others, our lives matter, our voices matter, and we deserve to live for ourselves. If you're feeling lost, if you're stuck in a place where you feel forgotten, remember this. It's never too late to reclaim your life and rediscover your worth. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't wait for permission to live your life to its fullest. If you've ever felt like you've lost yourself in the demands of others, or if you're on your own journey to reclaim your life, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to stay inspired on your own path of self-discovery.